But the whole week there's been this story in the back of my mind, this new book that came out. It's a couple of weeks ago. It's called The Big Dream, My Terrifyingly Beautiful Shamanic Initiation into the Arts. It's by Dayle McLeod. And if you've been watching the new, well, it's not new, it's been out for a couple of years, The Expanse series on Amazon.
No, I haven't seen this.
It's a sci-fi show. She's an actress on that show. She was also in a television show called LA Complex back in 2013, 2014. Mm-hmm. She's an actress from Canada. And she's just written this memoir of this insane experience she had. And I've been trying not to do it.
Why?
Because it's just so crazy. And I was so inspired by some of the scientific research we did on the last show. Some of that was wild too. But I wanted to do something in the same vein, but I just kept on coming back to this insane story. And it got to Friday to record this show, and I just thought, I've just got to tell it. It's just too good.
It's been calling you, Ben.
It has been calling me. I highly recommend checking this out. I'll tell you some of the story, and I won't spoil the whole thing, but I'll give you a sense of just some of the bizarreness that Dayle experiences. So she explains how the story starts in Toronto, and she was at a Meisner acting class. This was, like 5 or 6 years ago, she says. And she describes the Meisner technique. It's an improvisational tool that actors use. You'll use a pair of actors and they try and get to the root of the living moment, whatever that means.
Okay.
It's to get the actors out of their head and to start using intuition during a scene. So she says the way you achieve this is you basically pair up with someone and you go on stage and it's this timed exercise. And I might say to you, you're wearing a black shirt. And then you'll go, I'm wearing a black shirt. And I'll say again, you're wearing a black shirt. And then you'll look at me with a serious face and go, I'm wearing a black shirt. And this just repeats endlessly. It doesn't really matter what you say or what you point out. It's it's almost like a Zen thing, like just getting you out of your head.
Yeah, is it like the actor's equivalent of the flow?
Kind of. And she tells this story about how there was this guy in her class, his name was Jacques, and she said she saw him as a ruggedly handsome outlaw, a quiet sage. But at the time he was dating another actress, so she kind of, didn't pursue it, even though she had a secret crush on the guy. But there was one night she was in this acting class and she was paired up with Jacques for this exercise. And she said that day he came into class from an album cover shoot and he was covered from head to toe in rainbow paint. She said he looked like some kind of futuristic, sexy alien rainbow. So she gets on stage with the guy and she, very seriously looks at him and says, rainbow makeup. And he has his head down, he looks up, rainbow makeup. And they go back and forth saying rainbow makeup to each other because it's this stupid exercise, right? But somewhere along the way, as he is repeating rainbow makeup, he senses that she's attracted to him. And she said he suddenly walked towards me, held himself inches from my face and started bumping his chest against mine and gently pushed me up against the wall. She said sexual energy was pulsing through me. She turns around, presses her ass into his groin. He then reaches around her shoulder, grabs her face in his hand and presses his mouth to her ear so she can hear his heavy breathing. And he's like, rainbow makeup.
My, how flirting has changed.
She says, we reached the pinnacle of that moment and I turned around to face him. I smiled warmly and she said he looked at her in surprise. She lifts her shirt to expose her belly. He lifts his. They press their bellies into one another and both start to laugh. His laugh evolves into a cry. He eventually falls to his knees in a weak fall, falls into her arms, and the whole time he's crying like a child, still repeating rainbow makeup. He's like, rainbow makeup. Rainbow makeup.
Honey, do you really want to go out with a man that falls down crying covered in rainbow makeup?
She said he stopped crying. We stopped repeating it, lost in each other's eyes. She says the moment was broken by our instructor calling out that the exercise was finished. Now, when I come across a book where a grown man is painted in clown's vomit and is falling to his knees crying, saying rainbow makeup,
Sign us up. Yep. I get it. Yep.
So she said they both felt this really powerful connection. And a week later, she had met up with him again randomly at some film festival. And he told her that, look, I've broken up with my girlfriend. And she
probably left him because of the rainbow makeup.
She said, oh, rainbow makeup. And then she took him home. Now, she felt this instant connection with him. Obviously, their relationship progressed. Dayle said she felt needed with Jacques. He opened up to her about a lot of personal stuff, like his father died when he was really young. His mother had moved them to Portugal after his father died. And he lived this really kind of isolated, lonely expat life in Portugal. It really messed him up. And then his mother's mind started to go. She became obsessed with conspiracy theories about the Illuminati being a group of lizard people using mind control from a space station on the moon. And that's when I knew this is a story for the show. Dayle said she loved nurturing him, though. She loved being there for him. He had all these emotional problems, but she was, his rock. And they even opened up to each other about their spiritual beliefs. She was into transcendental meditation, and Jacques said he was into mysticism that his mother had taught him. Now, as time went on, though, she said she started to realize that they had different goals in their spiritual practice. Jacques became more and more obsessed with sorcery and, quote, opening the doors of perception. He wanted to attain spiritual power. And eventually, she said she gave up on her own path and kind of took on his pursuit as well. He had basically adopted conspiracy theories from his mother. He started to preach to her about the Illuminati. He said there are a group of people that use spiritual sorcery and sex magic to control the American government. And she said he would show her all this research and Masonic symbolism that was, all throughout society, that fun stuff. And then there were the radio programs by Alex Jones and David Icke that fed him more information about this conspiracy. David Icke banned, by the way, from Australia for apparently being an anti-Semite.
Yeah, no, I saw that he actually has been allowed now to tour.
Has he?
Being called a Holocaust denier. Now, as much as I'm not a fan of David Icke, I've never seen him be a Holocaust denier. Perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe I've missed it. But I have a feeling that
He doesn't even talk about the lizard people anymore. He just gets on stage and talks about love energy for 9 hours, doesn't he?
Well, this is typical of our media here, though.
Right.
So I don't even know if he's going to be able to tour, but we'll see.
All the headlines were saying he was spreading hate. I'm like, what? It's David Icke. Yeah, he thinks the Queen's a lizard person, but he's not spreading hate.
Well, I mean, you shouldn't spread hate about the Queen. I mean,
Anyway, his Jacques' paranoia became so intense, he started to prepare for the apocalypse. He had like an apocalypse kit in case the Illuminati was about to take over. So not quite a stable individual.
No.
Jacques started to depend on her for everything, though. She said, I became his mother, his therapist, his maid, his cook, his driver, his whore. And Dayle describes how the relationship ultimately became really toxic. She kind of lost her self-esteem. He was emotionally abusing her as well. Like his favorite joke was to write her an email or send her a message telling her how he was going to kill her. But as a joke.
That's not a joke.
No.
Even if you're saying it's a joke, that's not a joke.
He thought it was hilarious on how he couldn't wait to tell all her friends on how he had killed her. And she's like, okay, honey.
She should have left at the rainbow makeup.
Well, this was the problem. She was starting to lose all her self-esteem and really anchor herself to him. He started to convince her to distance herself from her friends,
it's a classic technique.
Yeah, distance herself from her family. He tried to convince her that all her emotional problems were because of her family. Kind of textbook manipulative behavior. And she said eventually her life just revolved around him. Things took a turn, though, when their visas were expired. He must have had maybe a European visa and she was on a Canadian visa. And then he offered to marry her so they could apply for their green cards together and stay in Los Angeles.
But you need to have a green card to be able to
maybe because he was born in America, it would be easier for him to apply.
Of course, yeah.
So that was his offer. And even though she knew the relationship was bad, she agreed. She says, tragically, I felt deep down that I wasn't going to make it as an actress and I'd lost all of my confidence. She said, if I married him, at least I could be in close proximity to his talent, to his success. That was her reasoning. And listen to how romantic this guy's proposal was. He basically said, all right, look, we can get married, but you've got to pay for it. I don't want anything traditional. I want it to be stupid, funny, and irreverent. Just a joke. The whole thing needs to be a joke. We're going to go to Las Vegas. We're going to get married by an Elvis impersonator. We won't wear a dress and a suit. We're going to wear costumes. She's like, whatever you want, honey. And that's what they do. They go to Vegas and get married by an awful Elvis impersonator dressed in fancy dress. Now, after they're married and they head back to, to live in LA, they applied for their green cards, but she explains when you apply for a green card, while you're waiting for the application, you can't work. You're legally not allowed to work. So all they could do was basically sit at home, smoke weed, watch TV, and scream at each other. And that's what they did.
To a great relationship.
Yeah, they were stuck in their friend Paul's house. He had this little guest house that they were staying in. So they had a place to stay. It was cheap rent. But they were just arguing nonstop. And Dayle said after one of those screaming matches, Jacques, her new husband, storms out and she gets a phone call from her friend in Toronto named Austin. And he was on his way stopping in LA for a night before he was flying out to Peru. And he wanted to catch up with Dayle for that day. So she says, great, let's go for a hike down at Topanga Canyon in California. So that's what they do. They meet up and go for this hike. And during the hike, she asks him the obvious question, why on earth are you going to Peru? What's in Peru? And he opens up and tells her he's going for a series of 9 ayahuasca ceremonies. Now, all Dayle really knows about ayahuasca is it's a kind of tea that you drink that makes you throw up. She
didn't know about the hallucinogenic effect?
She knows it's hallucinogenic, but she's not that familiar with it. And he starts to explain what it is, how it can solve a lot of life problems, so to speak.
Emotional disturbances.
Yeah, and in his opinion, everyone should do it. He says, look, it's like doing 10 years of therapy in one night. You should absolutely do it, he says. Now, that night she returns home and she tells her husband, Jacques, that, look, there's something wrong with me. It's like I don't know how to love. She's convinced she's got this serious problem. And he kind of nods in agreement. He's like, yeah, bitch, that's your problem. It sounds like he's mostly the problem. She tells him about ayahuasca and how, she thinks maybe it could help me. And he gives her permission. They both fall asleep on the couch and she's like, great, I'm going to go and do this. So how on earth do you do it though? She doesn't have the money to go to Peru. How on earth is she going to do it in California? Well, the next day she goes back to Topanga Canyon because it's kind of the hippie center of the United States, apparently. And she pulls into the parking lot at the local general store. And when she gets out of a car, she sees a man carrying a box to his Mercedes, like this big kind of wooden box. She says, hi, and he says hi back. And he turns to her and says, would you like to buy some High Priestess? And they're these little brown glass bottles, and they've all got the lettering on them, High Priestess. And she thinks it's some kind of perfume or something. She's like, what on earth is this? What are you selling? And he says, it's, cannabis-infused personal lubricant for women. It's the highest quality CO2 compressed cannabis oil with MCT coconut oil. It's perfectly natural, and it's delicious on popcorn.
And other places, apparently.
Apparently other places. She's great. She says, great, I'm Dayle. He introduces himself. He's Greg. And they get talking, and she basically blurts out, look, I've come to the canyon to find someone who can point me in the direction of an ayahuasca ceremony. And he just stops, goes quiet, and kind of checks her out, makes sure she's not a narc or something. And essentially says, look, it's not my kind of medicine, but I've got a friend I can put you in touch with, and he's the real deal. So he gives her this Facebook contact with a girlfriend of his, and she messages Dayle the same day and says, look, I've got this guy, he's a shaman, his name's Abe, and I'll give him your number. So that night she goes home and she gets a call from this guy at 6 p.m. And immediately this guy says, why do you want to do it? What's your reasoning? You're just looking for some fun. Why do you want to do this? And she unloads about how unhappy she is. her inability to love, her childhood traumas. Apparently, the family had alcoholism problems and emotional abuse.
Is he thinking, well, I wasn't asking for that much detail, but fine.
Well, he basically says, great, bring all that to the ceremony. Just so happens there's an open slot this weekend, $550.
In Peru or in the canyon?
In America. Well, it doesn't, somewhere in California.
Yeah, okay.
Right, somewhere in California.
So she doesn't have to make a big trip.
She's got exactly $550 in her bank account. So she empties her bank account, pays the guy, says, great, I'm in. Now, it turns out you do have to do a special diet before you go on an ayahuasca session. But it just so happened she was doing one of these kind of kooky LA diets anyway, where she was just cleansing on lemons or something.
Yeah, juice fasting.
So which was basically already doing what you're supposed to be doing. So she could go to that slot. So that night, but this is before she'd even, because the ayahuasca session was in a couple of days. That night, she's doing a regular routine with her husband, Jacques, for dinner, sitting in front of the TV. She said all of a sudden, her body starts writhing like a snake. Like something's coming over her and she's doing these undulating movements starting in her hips, and this tingling sensation is going all the way up her spine to her head. And she stands up and starts moving almost like she's not in control of her body. There's this powerful new energy leading her, she said. Her body was moving in these spontaneous yoga poses, her hands going to positions she'd never learnt before. And she's pushing and pulling all her muscles, doing all these strange movements. And it eventually evolves into this weird, rhythmic, jerky dance, followed by ecstatic shaking. And Jacques is just sitting on the couch, just going, what is going on? What is wrong with you? After about 15 minutes of this, she's getting puffed out. She starts to lose her breath. She wiggles her way up the ladder because they've got a loft bed. You got to climb up there. And she's trying to figure out what is going on, trying to release whatever has taken over her body and figure out what its message is. She's lying on the bed. She says she's doing Jim Carrey faces, like like The Mask, pulling insane faces.
Is she possessed by something? Does she feel something come in?
This is what it sounds like. She says, I felt tickled on the inside to the point where I started to laugh so hysterically it became painful. Then she started to cry. All the while, her body is doing this weird wiggling and shaking and writhing. Then she said a slowly moving force field of energy enters her head and travels down through her body. And she's flooded with visions from her past, from a few days ago, and it keeps going back to, high school and then childhood memories. And she says, by the time the energy reached my pussy, I was fully experiencing my own birth.
Why would it relate to your own birth?
I don't know. She says, I called out for Jacques, but when I did, she said, it wasn't her voice that came out.
Please don't tell me it's her downstairs garage doors yelling out.
It was, no, it came out of her mouth.
Oh, okay, right. Okay.
I don't even think that's possible, what you're suggesting. It came out of her mouth.
Who knows when you're possessed by something?
She didn't queef to her husband to come up the stairs. Jacques! She said to Jacques to come up, but she said her voice was a foreign voice. It was really low tone, deep, with a Cajun accent. And she was basically like, get up on up here, Jacques. And if anyone doesn't know, that's what a Cajun accent sounds like.
Are you sure?
That's exactly what,
okay,
yeah.
Well, I'll believe you.
Most people haven't met a Cajun person. I know several. That's what they sound like.
Okay.
And she says she's feeling kind of tickled from the inside, that feeling again. And the language, like you're suggesting, it really does sound like something's taken over her body. I think this is pretty obvious at this stage. She says she feels ancient. She doesn't feel like herself anymore. Again, she mentions her pussy, saying it felt like it was opening itself wide and energy straight from the core of the earth was flowing up inside me. She mentions her genitals a lot in this story. She says she was now flinging itself. Her body was flinging itself against the walls, not just her pussy. And she's lifting her hands in the air, shaking, screaming. She was speaking to her husband in languages that were completely foreign to her. She had no idea what was coming out of her mouth. It's like she's speaking in tongues. Now, she's no longer in control, right? And her husband, Jacques, he's lying down and she strips his shirt off and puts her mouth on his solar plexus and starts going, oh. She's making this low groaning sound. She says basically what she felt she was trying to do was get his body to vibrate at the same frequency as her Cajun voice. And she's trying to feel because he's got some sadness from his childhood trapped inside him. And she feels like she can suck it out of his chest. And she does this. She's like, sucks it out through his solar plexus. It goes into her belly and she starts wailing again in this crazy voice that's not hers. Then this weird African tribal energy that's taken over her body leaves. The accent was gone. The speech pattern was gone. And it's replaced by this, she says it's a Japanese-like energy. And she's like, oh, hello.
It's Kori Nakamura.
She said the energy started moving throughout her body, flicking from one point in the room to the next. It was like a weird Japanese bird. And this Japanese energy took over and she's like, oh, Jack, you'll roll over. I give you a massage. And she starts massaging him in all these pressure points, not knowing what the hell she's doing. And she doesn't mention what Jacques doing during all of this. He's just kind of going with the flow. 4 hours of this go past, right? Where she's possessed by a little Japanese spirit doing some kind of shiatsu on her husband.
She's like, arigato. And then she's gone.
Well, she wanted to make it stop, but she said she couldn't. This Japanese energy was totally controlling her. After 4 hours, it swoops out. And she says she was taken over, this is what she called it, a delicious, buttery, sexy Marilyn Monroe energy. And it causes her to seductively start dancing for Jacques. And she starts to sing in a voice that's completely foreign to her. She's like, happy birthday, Mr. President.
Don't ever do that again.
She keeps singing over him. She climbs onto his body, because this is some sexy Marilyn Monroe spirit that's taken her over. And she starts grinding on him, just rubbing her pelvis back and forth on him. And suddenly, while she's doing that, the Marilyn Monroe energy leaves her body. And she feels this heaviness come through her, like this cement. And she opens up her mouth and a man's voice comes out. And she looks down at Jacques and this voice starts saying, my son, over and over again, my son, it's you. And she gets the feeling that she hasn't seen Jacques for years, for an incredibly long amount of time. And they both start to realize that she's channeling the spirit of Jacques' dead father while she's naked on top of him, grinding back and forth.
Yeah, because that's not creepy at all.
And the words, your mother, comes out, right? Your mother. I'm sorry. He says, I'm sorry. He's Australian, by the way, in my version of the story.
Right, yeah.
Over and over, he says this, your mother, I'm sorry. And it's about 4 a.m. at this stage. Like, she hasn't even had ayahuasca yet. She hasn't had a drug.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, what has she had?
Nothing.
Yeah, what caused this to happen? Just because she had a lemon cayenne pepper diet and all of a sudden she's got Marilyn Monroe?
Watching Netflix, maybe it was that. What, is this someone that should be going and taking ayahuasca in the next couple of days?
Probably not a good idea. But I assume from the fact that you persisted with this story that she obviously does.
Well, yeah, obviously she does. Eventually she falls asleep. You know, she's writhing for another hour before she can fall asleep. And it's a bizarre start to this adventure because she obviously calls her friend Austin the next day because, you know, before he leaves for Peru. And she says, look, all I did was agree to do this ceremony and then my body was overtaken by what felt like 5 different spirits. What the hell is going on? And his reply is that just having the intention to take ayahuasca can sometimes trigger something like a Kundalini awakening or some other paranormal experiences.
I've never heard that before.
Me neither. But simply her intention has triggered something.
Well, has it? This is the thing. If this guy's a charlatan or someone who's not entirely equipped to dose ayahuasca properly, could it be that she's actually let herself open to something to come in?
Well, she hasn't even done anything yet.
No, but maybe in setting
just
it
had
up,
the idea.
But maybe that's all it takes. It's like the intention. You've put the intention out there, and it's left you open and vulnerable to these possessing spirits.
Well, she takes her friend's advice, quite well, and says, "Okay, that sounds normal." And she goes off to the ayahuasca ceremony. Now, there's tons of detail on whether she's basically in a yurt in an undisclosed location.
Where's Jacques? He doesn't come along.
No, Jacques.
He's completely out of this.
Jacques out of the situation. She goes off and does it. And, she describes the first dose. She describes taking it and how, horrible the taste is. We always hear throwing up and just the awful molasses of the ayahuasca going down. But she starts hallucinating. She starts seeing animal heads floating around, bears, monkeys, tigers, snakes. And while she's having this hallucination, thinking, oh, this is weird, this trap door opens up in the yurt. Like, this door opens up.
A real one or one that's being imagined?
Well, let's just say she thinks it's real.
Okay.
Because it opens up directly below her and she falls into it. And she falls onto this wooden stage with a thump, and she kind of gets up and she looks around thinking, what the hell is going on? And there's a massive audience of people all wearing Victorian era clothing, smoking cigarettes. And they see her fall on the stage and they all start howling with laughter. It's the funniest thing they've ever seen.
It's like some weird vaudeville act.
She looks around. She's like, what is going on there? I'm in the middle of it's obviously a play. And she's like, I don't know what my lines are. I don't know what's going on. And she looks over and the crowd's still laughing at her. For some reason, they think it's so hilarious. And on the edge of the stage, she sees a woman sitting at a desk knitting, having a conversation with a man in a top hat. So
sounds like ayahuasca.
She walks on over and she stumbles and trips on the way, and the crowd bursts into laughter again. She gets up and goes over, and she's trying to get the attention of this woman knitting. And she's like, psst, hey. And eventually she gets this woman's attention and she says, what am I doing here? What is this place? And then the audience is laughing again. They think it's hilarious. And she hears the voice of ayahuasca in her mind in this moment. And the voice says, don't you get it? You're the clown in the show. Your purpose is just to be you. Just be present to what is happening around you. There is no way you could separate yourself from your role when you just are. And she sucks back up and she's out of the trapdoor, back in the yurt, and the session's over. The vision's finished. And she enlightened to it. She's like, she felt this love, this rush of love and compassion. And she says one of her issues is she'd always been so worried throughout her whole life of getting a life right, making sure she was living her purpose, right? But the experience showed her that just by living, she was doing that. She didn't need to keep trying to find it. She didn't need to worry about fulfilling her purpose. So she was just on the path by living her life.
Right. So it's kind of a psychedelically induced epiphany to allow her to live with less pressure.
Exactly. Stop worrying about it. Stop stressing over it. Now, there's a couple of sessions. So in the second session, she goes in and you're supposed to go in with an intention. And she's obviously going in small increments. So her next intention is to gain enlightenment. And I love this.
Why make it small? Go for the big stuff.
I love this idea that you can just go and sit in a yurt one night in California, drink some ayahuasca, and be enlightened when you come out of it. Just
it doesn't really work that way.
For $500.
That's a good deal.
So in this second ceremony, she said the medicine came on really strong, really quick. And suddenly, in the blackness of the yurt, this figure appears floating in the middle of the yurt. And it's a figure in like a cross-legged Buddha pose with a smile on his face. And he's kind of floating around the room with one of those, bodhisattva hand gestures.
Yeah.
And he floats around to face her. And it's Kanye West.
You know what? I would believe that. I would not be surprised if some Buddhist saint is actually Kanye West.
Or if Kanye is a Buddhist saint.
That's what I'm saying.
And he's been sent here.
Yes.
To, I don't know to do what, but something.
Do something.
And
to create awareness for what I don't know.
So Kanye's floating in the middle of the room and every chakra in his body is glowing. These glowing energy centers. And orbiting around him like some kind of moon is Kim Kardashian. And she's holding their baby. just rotate in orbit around Kanye. And she sees this vision of Kanye for a while.
Come on, though. I mean, this is obvious that she's clearly been influenced by popular culture.
No, Aaron.
Oh, no, it's definitely Kanye West and Kim Kardashian.
Shut your foul, blasphemous mouth. So eventually this other strange entity approaches her. And it's like a sassy, kind of shapely, sexy woman.
Is it Beyonce?
It's not Beyonce, but she's neon. She's got like a neon outline, like she's glowing. And this strange woman reaches down to Dayle and, kind of gestures to take my hand. Dayle reaches up and takes this neon woman's hand. And as this woman pulls her up, she gets pulled out of her body. And this weird neon sassy woman takes her through the wall of the yurt. And all of a sudden, she finds that they're in the Amazon jungle. They're not in California anymore. They're in the Amazon. And this neon woman, she has a giant crown of antlers. And she kind of turns to Dayle and pulls off this crown and hovers it over Dale's head. And then finally places it on Dale's head. There's a flash of light and she vanishes. The neon woman vanishes. Dale's just standing there and she looks down and she's now neon. She's glowing as well. She's in her spirit body.
With an antler helmet.
With an antler, yes. It's like, yeah, with an antler crown. She goes back into the yurt and she looks down at her body still lying there and she realizes that she's actually huge. She's like, 10 feet tall. And her physical body is just her usual 5 foot something. And she's looking down going, how the hell am I going to go back into my body? But as she's having this thought, she realizes that she feels amazing because she's broken the bonds of physicality.
Yeah.
She feels free and unrestricted. She feels like she's full of power, godly even in this ethereal form. She doesn't want to go back to her body. She's like, I don't need my body.
Fair enough.
And I find this is a really dangerous situation because it would be very tempting to have that feeling and then just go, no, I don't need to go back. I wonder how many people, have issues because of that.
Well, I mean, I don't know the stats exactly, but isn't it very low, people dying on ayahuasca trips?
Yes.
Aren't the stats for that pretty low?
Yes, but maybe, remember what John Ward told us the story of how he took ayahuasca and then he blacked out and then he woke up.
Something else was driving.
He woke up at Heathrow Airport from Peru and he had no idea how he got there.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't choose to go back in your body when you're an all-powerful spirit thing.
Yeah, does something come back in?
What is something else going to just take a trip somewhere? That's what happened to John.
Well, maybe that's why the stats are so low. There's no deaths.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just simply because someone has left and something else has stepped in.
But as she's having this thought, she gets a very stern warning from ayahuasca. Ayahuasca talks to her in her mind and beams her an image saying, basically, you must go back. It's an image of a genie in a bottle going back into a bottle. And she sees this image and whoosh, she's back in her body and the vision is over.
So what was the point, though, of putting the deer antler helmet on and being on neon? At least you can go do something.
It's some kind of symbol of
You're
power.
greater than your...
Yeah, some kind of initiation of power or something. Maybe Kanye's the whole answer there.
He's never the answer.
So anyway, that's it. That's her experience. So not the next day, like immediately after it, she's driving home.
She's just taken ayahuasca.
Yeah.
She's had hallucinogenic experiences and been out of her body. She's driving home.
I don't know if it affects your ability to drive.
I mean,
we don't know that.
Some of the documentaries I've seen, you probably don't want to be driving immediately after taking it.
Apparently, you're okay once it wears off.
Oh, okay.
So it worn off. She's driving home. And let's just say she caught a taxi. She caught a taxi home. The whole way home, she's on cloud nine. She's just feeling incredible happiness and peace. And it's all entirely new to her, this feeling of just love. She feels like her chest is exploding with love. She feels amazing.
And yet it's like that scene from The Wolf of Wall Street where her car is being crumpled and smashed.
Yeah.
She's all high and euphoric. That's clouds. It's wonderful.
Yeah, she's run over like 3 people on the way home.
It's a mailbox wedged in a windscreen.
No, she feels like she's just survived some great ordeal and she has that exhilaration that I made it, I'm alive, life is worth living.
Well, it's something that we typically hear from many people that take ayahuasca that do have a good experience. It's revitalizing.
And when she gets back to their house, Jacques had just been taking mushrooms, so he was on a high as well. They were both just basking in this glow.
What a great mix.
Yeah, what a great situation. And they felt happy together for the first time in ages. It's like we've solved our problem.
No, you haven't.
Now, for weeks after this ayahuasca ceremony, she almost felt like a god. She said every time she attempted anything, she easily succeeded. She would understand music in new ways. She could guess exactly what was about to happen on any TV show or movie she was watching. If it was something even if it was something she'd never seen before, she started writing music and poetry. Ideas were just pouring through her. Her senses were picking up on information as if it was alive, like everything was communicating with her. The whole universe was open to her. And she says, this is going to sound kind of crazy, and it sort of is, but I could also communicate with plants and animals telepathically. She said it was so natural, she barely even noticed that she was doing it. She felt like she understood everything about the universe. Physics made sense. Math made sense. It was all just music, love, emotion, and energy. And this psychic afterglow lasted for about 2 weeks, she said. And then the depression started to creep back in. She started to feel stupid for thinking, I've cured this lifelong pattern of thinking just by taking a plant. In the meantime, her husband Jacques gets a TV role on a kind of a soapy show, and he leaves. But before he leaves to go on set, he says to her, "Let's do one kind of big mushroom session before I go on this big job." So she knows that you're not meant to take psychedelics for a month after you do ayahuasca.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You're not meant to mess with it.
Well, that would make sense.
But because this afterglow is starting to fade.
She's chasing the dragon.
Yeah, she wants to recapture it, right? So she does it. She does mushrooms with him. Now, they both did 5 grams, which is considered the heroic dose. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And everything became holographic, she said. And Jacques had this kind of breakdown in the experience where, again, he's on his knees crying. And the Cajun woman comes into her again. The low, soulful, deep voice comes in. "Get up off them knees, boy. You make a joke on God on your knees like that. Get up." And Jacques is looking at her curiously going, "What? What you looking at, sad boy? You always crying, boy. What you so sad about?" And she's looking at Jacques through the eyes of this Cajun spirit that's taken over her, and she can see inside Jacques' chest there's a stone, like something lodged inside his heart. And she looks at it, she's like, "You sad about your daddy? Let me get it out of you, boy. You sad about your daddy? I'll fix it."
She sounds like she'd make a great personal trainer.
He sits down in her lap crying and purging the sadness from his heart. And when he's finished, they both start laughing and they stand up. She says the Cajun African character leaves her. And this new thing comes in. She gets taken over by something. And it's this weird jester energy, she says, like a trickster spirit comes in and takes over. And she tries to tell Jacques that she wants to go upstairs and lie down, but everything comes out like a nursery rhyme or a riddle. So instead of saying...
Yeah, like a jester.
Instead of saying, I want to go upstairs, it comes out as, "Reaching stiffly for the sky, I bare my fingers when it's cold. In warmth I wear an emerald glove, and in between I dress in gold."
I'm sorry, what?
She's like, "What? What was that?" I just wanted to say, "It stands upright and can be quite grand. Its secret is not hidden, but right at hand. What is it?" And Jacques' like, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" And every time she tried to explain there's something wrong with me, another riddle would come out.
"These riddles 3 I give to thee."
Yeah. "Riddle me this, Batman." And it just made them laugh hysterically. Like every time she tried to talk, nonsense would come out. And then finally, the peak of the mushroom experience kicked in and everything went indescribably silent. She said she started seeing chi and prana cycling through the air and in their bodies. It formed grids all around them. And then finally, the psilocybin kind of left their bodies, right? And they're both kind of hungry, so Dayle says, look, I'll go out and I'll get us some food. So she gets to the end of the driveway, because remember, they're living on a property and they're just in the guest house, and the owner, Paul, owns the whole property. She gets to the end of the driveway and she sees a fellow castmate who used to be on the show LA Complex with her. Her name's Jennifer. And she said Jennifer was just glowing and really happy. And she said, hi, how are you going? And Jennifer said, oh, you got to come inside and meet my new dog. So Dale's like, oh, great. Yeah, I'll meet your new dog. She's really happy. She goes inside and she meets this dog. And as soon as she meets this dog, she immediately has a telepathic communication with it, with her friend Jennifer's dog. And she says the dog felt it too. So Dayle is so ecstatic with this experience of a telepathic connection with the dog, she starts sending the dog telepathic commands, and the dog starts responding. The dog's like running around the living room, rolling over, jumping up and barking, doing tricks from all her telepathic commands. She's using her mind, and her friend Jennifer is freaking out. Her friend's like, what are you doing to my dog? Stop this, stop. She's like, Dayle, are you okay? You seem strange. Let me get you a drink of water. So she goes and gets Dayle a drink of water. Because obviously in her mind, she thinks she's telepathically commanding the dog, but who knows what it looked like from the outside. So anyway, Jennifer comes back with a drink of water, but so does Paul, the owner of the big house that they're living in. And as soon as she looks at Paul, his face turns gray, his skin turns gray, and flesh starts dropping off his skull. And eventually he's just a skull talking to her. She obviously freaks out. She jumps on the floor. I think she actually jumps into the dog bed. She's screaming, right? But because the dog still has a telepathic connection with her, the dog starts flipping out as well. The dog is crying and howling and going bananas, and it's just absolute chaos. At this point, maybe her husband Jacques had heard the commotion. He rushes in, kind of apologizes, scoops her up, and just leaves, just gets the hell out of there. He wants to take her to the movies to kind of, chill out a bit. So they end up going to the movies. Obviously, the mushrooms are still affecting her somehow, even though Jacques is fine. Now, they go to the movies, and the only thing that's on is Kevin Hart's film, The Wedding Ringer. Great film.
Never seen it.
I've never seen it either. So they start watching The Wedding Ringer, and this voice immediately starts speaking in her head. Now, let's take a break here, and when we come back, we'll see where this story goes, what the messages are that she starts receiving, and whether Dayle has fallen into some kind of spell and whether she can break out of it. You're listening to Mysterious Universe. Stay with us. Now we're back talking about Dayle McLeod's new book, The Big Dream. It's available now. I'll link to it in the show notes. But she's just been taken to the movies after having this bizarre experience after coming down off mushrooms. She should be off the mushrooms. Her husband, Jacques, has taken her to the theaters to watch Kevin Hart's masterpiece, The Wedding Ringer. And she starts hearing this voice in her head. It starts saying lines from the Bible saying, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and God said, let there be light. But then it starts explaining what that means. This voice is saying, that's actually a metaphor for the creation of consciousness. The Bible contains parables, stories, and myths to be seen as a map of the development of human consciousness and the human soul. Exodus is a parable for freeing your consciousness from enslavement to your ego. And this just goes on, and she kind of stops and says, oh, Jacques, did you know that Exodus is a parable for freeing your consciousness from ego? And he's like, shut up, I'm trying to watch the movie. And this just keeps on going on. She keeps getting these messages about the Bible from this voice in her head. Now, eventually she says to her husband, Jacques, I need to go home. And he's like, why? I need to go home and read the Bible right now. He's like, oh, whatever. So she goes home and she starts reading the Bible. And her mind is like, her mind is exploding. She said, I felt like I'd discovered a pot of gold, a map to my life, to my soul, to my friggin' consciousness. There were answers to questions that no one had ever been able to answer. Why hadn't anyone ever told me that the Bible truly, what the Bible truly was? So she keeps reading. She starts being told about the functions of nature are reproduced in miniature in the human body, and the body is like a textbook for the universe, and to understand yourself is to understand the universe, like all these
very metaphorical, obviously.
Wisdom sayings that the spinal column is actually Jacob's ladder from the Bible, and it's like a pattern of connecting earth to heaven. You know, all this interesting stuff, right? And she's overwhelmed by these downloads of information. There's tons more in the book, like if you want to actually read what she's getting.
You're saying downloads. Does she connect to something else which is pushing information into her?
Well, it's a voice in her head.
Uh-huh.
It's not her own thoughts. It's being injected from somewhere. So she's so overwhelmed with this, she ends up, falling asleep on the couch in the living room with the Bible on her chest. And it must have been past midnight, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, where she wakes up and the room is full of light, but it's actually the moonlight streaming into the living room. And she gets up and she goes and looks at the moon, and she hears this strange melody. And she becomes so infatuated with this bizarre melody that she suddenly realizes she's not in her body anymore. She looks down and her body's kind of still there on the couch. And her perspective is above her head, kind of shoots above her head, and then kind of shoots down into her left eye like an arrow, like her consciousness goes, pew! And she finds herself in this black void. And out of nowhere, there's this spiraling staircase kind of in glowing white light right out in front of her. And at the top of this staircase is a door with what must be an incredibly bright light, because the light is spilling out from underneath the crack right at the bottom of the door. And she hears this knock at the door. And she's like, who's there? And she goes up to the top of the staircase, slowly pushes open the door, and she's blasted by this glowing white light. And it slowly fades away. Like she can't see anything but light. It slowly fades away. And she's back in her living room. But now there's 2 strange men sitting at the dining table. She doesn't know how they got in. She doesn't know who they are. Who are these men? They're quietly chatting to each other. Now, after a moment, she gets closer. Her eyes kind of adjust to the moonlight again. And they both turn towards her. It's Albert Einstein and Nelson Mandela sitting in her living room. So what do? What do you do, Aaron? You've just gone to the movies to watch a Kevin Hart movie. You've come home. You've read the Bible. You've got new insights. You've fallen asleep. You've woken up. Albert Einstein and Nelson Mandela are in your living room. What do?
You slap yourself across the face, splash some water in your face and wake up?
No, she says, hello.
Okay, well, that's another option.
Einstein very enthusiastically gets up and says, hello, Dayle, welcome. He throws his arm over her shoulder. He gives her a squeeze. He turns her to look at Mandela. Mandela's grinning with this goofy look on his face. She's like, what the hell is going on? Why are you guys here? You have crossed the threshold. You have answered the call, the knock at your door. You have just passed your first initiation into the Illuminati. And he claps his hands in excitement. And she's like, what? The Illuminati? What the hell are you talking about, Al? Yes, the Illuminati. We are a group of individuals who reach the state of enlightenment on Earth to make manifest the work of God. And Mandela chimes in and says, it was us who were teaching you about the true meaning of the Bible last night. And she says, well, I thought the Illuminati was like a group of people that did sex magic rituals and did mind control on people to gain power for the New World Order. Einstein's like, no, nine. These people are not real Illuminati. Real Illuminati cannot be initiated by performing rituals. Initiation happens within your consciousness, just like what is happening with you now. And Einstein explains that the real Illuminati are people who have reached enlightenment, been initiated into this special group and been given certain powers like telepathy, astral travel, clairvoyance. They can transcend space and time. Basically Superman. And Einstein explains that some of them are scientists, some are politicians, because they're the first two groups of people that usually are enlightened, scientists and politicians.
Yeah, are they?
Musicians and artists also included. And he basically says, we are here to welcome you into the Illuminati and teach you our mystery. So she's just standing there in silence. She understandably doesn't know what to say. And Al and Nelson are just kind of staring back at her. But eventually Nelson Mandela stands up and says, take my hand. So she takes Nelson Mandela's hand. And she feels herself getting sucked into this weird spinning vortex. And when she feels this transition, she opens her eyes and she's just floating in this black space. It's empty, devoid of anything. And eventually there's a movement and everything transforms and she's sitting above planet Earth looking down on our planet. And Mandela starts explaining the history of creation, how everything is consciousness, everything's vibrations and love, the usual stuff. And Mandela wipes his hands over Dayle's eyes, and her vision transforms, and she sees that the Earth is now a blanket of overlapping waves. It's an ocean of vibration. Everything's glittering as if sound waves are made of billions of strings of light. And Mandela's explaining to her that everything is vibration. So basically, this is a really kind of long section where she's getting all this wisdom and knowledge, but ultimately we understand why they've come to her. It's because she has a mission. And Einstein says to her that the Earth is about to experience the end of a 26,000-year cycle. A new era will be ushered in, a new axial precession. And essentially Einstein says to her, it will be the era of divine feminine.
Oh, no.
It will be the holy vagina, Aaron.
Oh, no. This is okay. So the one thing that got my attention.
Don't you say anything bad about the divine feminine.
No, I'm not saying anything bad about the divine feminine, but what it feels like a little bit is that she may have attended Aphrodite University. There's a little
she
bit.
may have graduated from Aphrodite University.
There's a little bit of a feel there of the same, but it could just be the terminology that's being used.
Right.
Because I'm just saying, oh no, not because it's feminine. I'm just saying, oh no, because it's a little bit cliche. I mean, it's already cliche that you've got Einstein and Nelson Mandela showing up to impart wisdom to you.
So essentially, Einstein continues to explain that even though there's this new era coming, the work of God can't be brought forth unless it has a special conduit. And they need a person who can vibrate at the level of enlightenment to bring it forth. And Einstein says, as of right now, we have no living Illuminati member to do this work. If we do not have a member of the Illuminati on Earth to channel the energy of the new age of the divine feminine, the Earth will miss out on this regenerative opportunity and all of humanity will die.
So hang on. Is it suggesting that she is going to be the savior of humanity?
Yes. Mandela turns with a look in his eyes and says, we've been watching you. We have been watching you. And we think you could be the one to do this. It was them who awakened her Kundalini energy and sent source energy through her body. They're clearing out her energy, healing her DNA so that she can receive this illuminated mission to save the planet. Einstein tells her, well, she says, look, okay, she kind of gets it. She's like, okay, so you need me to act as a channel. I'm some kind of lightning rod.
1.21 gigawatts.
Catching a high vibration of consciousness, and I need to bring the divine feminine to Earth. But she says, look, I've got no idea how to do this. And so Einstein says, okay, first, you need to go warn the planet to go underground for 4 days. You cannot cause panic, though. Just get everyone to go underground, to just leave underground. Mass panic will lower the vibration of the earth, so make sure nobody panic. And then Einstein's image starts to glitch, like the signal is getting weak, right? And he says, you need to find the 7 earth crystals that the Illuminati stole. Put them back into the earth chakra points. Pearl of the great price. Lock and key. And then they disappear. And she wakes up and she's like, why did the connection drop? Just as Einstein was telling me how to get the 7 crystals and what to do with them. Now she turns to Jacques, who's just waking up. It's funny how at the start you kind of hate Jacques, and by the end you're like, I feel you, bro. I totally feel you. Because Jacques has to deal with this shit every day. He just leaves. Basically, she wakes him up and says, I was just initiated into the Illuminati last night. Jacques, wake up. And he's like, I got to go work. He gets on his motorcycle. He just drives away because he's got to go to the set and film his TV show. So the whole thing felt so real to her, though, that she says she truly believed she was given a mission to save the Earth and that Albert Einstein and Nelson Mandela were relying on her. It was a drive and an urge.
I think this does certainly demonstrate, though, and I'm not casting aspersions upon her, but it does demonstrate that these drugs and substances are not the answer for solving the internal emotional issues that you have.
Well, that's part of why I wanted to do this story, because we had Scott tell or share his ayahuasca experience or part of it on the last show. And so often those experiences are really positive, very transformative in an incredibly positive way. But there are these stories as well where something goes awry. And this really reminds me, especially where this goes, of the tales we've covered on the show where people are led on a wild goose chase by entities.
Low-level entities.
Entities are leading them on this goose chase.
Well, if they're low-level, I would think that they would manifest as they would look like religious figures, but they would also look like celebrities and they would look like famous figures.
Except for Kanye. Kanye's real.
Yeah, okay, except for Kanye. But everyone else, I think if you're a low-level entity, you're going to manifest as something that would elicit, I guess, a stronger reaction from someone, from contemporary culture.
Well, she's now in this state of, holy crap, I have to do this, and really believes that the earth will be destroyed, everyone will die.
But you see, if she went to a medical professional saying that everyone's going to die because Einstein told me that I have to get everyone underground, from that perspective, she would be perceived as being insane.
Yes, but then she would be locked in a mental institution. She wouldn't be able to find the 7 crystals and we'd all die.
She's going to find the 7 crystals before the next full moon.
Sure, book yourself into the hospital after you find the 7 crystals and save the planet.
Okay, so does she try to find the crystals?
Well, the phone rings. And remember the guy that was selling CO2 cannabis-infused self-lubricant for women?
Yeah.
It's him.
What, High Priestess?
High Priestess. It's him. And he has a job offer for her. She was interested in working in his office, doing admin as a job on the side. And he said, I'll check it out. So he wants to get her in for an interview. So she says, fine, I've got a lot on today, like saving the earth, but I'll come in for the interview. So she gets in a car, she starts driving. And along the way, all she's thinking about is, I've got to find these 7 chakra crystals of the earth. I've got to find them. I've got to steal them back from the fake Illuminati. I've got to put them back in the corresponding chakra points to save the planet, but I don't know how to do it. Damn it. Why did Albert Einstein and Nelson get cut off just when I needed them? And she's driving along the coast because she's going back to Topanga Canyon. She's on Highway 1. And she looks out at the ocean. And as she looks out at the surf and the beach, she sees these robots emerging from the water. Hundreds and hundreds of robots. She looks all the way down the end, all the way down the other end. These mechanized things are stomping out onto the surf like Terminators. And immediately she knows what it is. It's the fake Illuminati. It's the fake Illuminati. They must be sending their robot troops in for when the world goes dark. They must be invisible to everyone else except for the initiated. So only she can see them. So she keeps driving, right? And this is where, man, stuff gets dangerous. She's driving, she's tuning onto the radio, and every radio station she flicks through is a program talking about ISIS terrorizing the people of Earth. And she suddenly thinks, oh God, Isis, the goddess. I saw her with the crown of antlers. Remember the neon woman with the crown of antlers?
Yeah.
She thinks that is the goddess Isis that is now killing everyone, terrorizing people. And she believes it was her fault. She had somehow channeled Isis to Earth during that ceremony.
She left the door open.
And she's some kind of demon who is working for the fake Illuminati. Now she's got to solve that problem too. Now, just at this moment where all this is building up, she's thinking, what can I do? Salvation. Salvation comes in the form of a voice. She hears this strong, confident voice in her head say, look directly into the sun. So she pulls her car over. She takes off her sunglasses and stares directly into the burning sun. The voice continues in her mind. It says, let it burn through your left eye. And she does. She closes her right eye and stares with her left, letting the sun burn it for as long as she can handle. The voice continues. Now look into the sky, commanding her again. So with her now burnt eye, she looks into the clouds and she sees those kind of anonymous masks floating in the sky, and their different faces all moving, and they're all laughing at her. And she realizes that the fake Illuminati has infiltrated the channels of communication in her brain that Einstein and Mandela were using, and now they're tricking her telepathically. Now she doesn't know if the voices she's listening to are Einstein and Mandela or the fake Illuminati. How can you tell? So she needs to get those crystals now. She's got to solve this. So suddenly she hears another voice in her head. Just follow the gold, the voice says. So she looks straight ahead and she sees golden light from the sun reflecting in her rearview mirror. So she's like, okay, well, there's a 50-50 chance that the voice is helping me and that it's Al and Nelson. It might be the fake Illuminati, but I've got to take that chance. So she turns left, suddenly turns left while she's driving. Remember, the voice said, follow the gold. So as she's driving, there's a gold-plated window on a building down the street, and she turns right to follow it. The word gold is then written inside some graffiti straight ahead of her. So she continues forward until she lands in a parking lot, like she's being led. And while she's in this parking lot, she looks over and she sees a Masonic lodge with gold lettering. The voice says, go inside. So she opens the door to this building and goes inside. And inside is this winding staircase. And there's a room at the top of the stairs. She slowly enters the room, and inside she finds a large lounge with a red carpet. There's vintage ornate furniture, this gigantic fireplace. And above the fireplace is a black and white painting of a spiraling staircase with an open door at the top. And there's light spilling out everywhere. And it's the spitting image of the spiral staircase she saw in her vision when Nelson Mandela and Albert Einstein first appeared in her living room. And she's like, holy shit. She sprints out of the room, freaking out. She runs down the stairs into the parking lot. She's like, this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. She gets in a car. She drives home. She's got to figure out her next move. Like, screw the job interview. I got to figure out how to get the 7 crystals and put an end to this madness. She goes back home and finds Jacques. He's back home. And again, she tells him how she's been initiated into the Illuminati. She needs to find 7 crystals. He's over it. He's like, oh, I'm sick of hearing this. Again, he just jumps on his motorcycle and disappears. Now, she's pissed off by how he's not supporting her in her quest to find the 7 crystals. So to cool off,
you blame him?
to cool off, she goes into the bathroom and she splashes water on her face to kind of, get her bearing. And the voice is back. It says, use the water. She's like, how? How do I use the water? Water is the source of life. It is ancient and holds the memory of the entire existence of Earth. Water is in every human being and is receptive to vibrations. 1 drop of water containing information could ignite the whole ocean. Give it the message, and it will spread. She's like, I've got it. if I speak my message into the water, it'll spread like wildfire and reach the subconscious mind of anyone who touches it or drinks it. It'll go into their intuition and they'll follow their instincts, and everyone on the planet will live underground. Because remember, her mission is to get everyone to live underground.
For 4 days.
I was thinking about that today. Like, even if Jesus, Lao Tzu, and Buddha showed up in the studio tonight and said, you've got to go live underground for 4 days, I'd be like, how do I get underground? I don't know where a cave is.
Do I find a subway somewhere?
What do I do? There's no underground where I live.
But you can't get 7 billion people underground
I
either.
know. Can you imagine the queue? It's just ridiculous.
Talk about spreading coronavirus.
Yes, we're in a pandemic. We don't have time to get underground. So she realizes if she speaks to the water, this message will get to the world's people. So what she does.
You have a sip of water, like, I need to get underground.
What she does. Yeah, well, that's what would happen to you. But she just immediately thinks, okay, the best way to deal with this is, first of all, completely get naked. So she takes all her clothes off as she goes
Why
in.
get naked?
Why not get naked, Aaron? She goes into the bathroom and she lies down in the shower and starts speaking into the drain pipe.
What?
She says, everything's going to be okay, guys. Listen, there's going to be a shift in the rotation of the earth and we're going to experience blackness for 4 days. But don't worry, just go underground where it's safe. Make your shelters out of stone, mud, sticks, or anything from the earth. And as she says this kind of soothing tribal lullaby song comes into her mind. So she starts singing this into the drain pipe. She's like, Amaya, kumbaya, la la. And she does this for freaking hours. She's in there for hours singing into the drain pipe. And poor Jacques comes home from his motorcycle ride to escape this madness. And he finds her naked in the bathroom singing into the drain pipe.
Yeah.
So what the fuck is going on? She basically says, takes one look, and he's like, I'm hungry, I'm going to get some food. And he pisses off again. So she's like, all right. And she goes in to turn on the television because she thinks like her whispering's done to the water. She turns on the TV and there's all these, like, you know how they do Brady Bunch style split screen with all these different faces?
Yeah.
There's all these model beautiful women on the TV.
Not the divine feminine.
And they're all each holding this sparkling jewel of different color. And the newscaster on the show is interviewing them about what they're holding in their hands.
Probably just a CVS commercial or something.
Well, the newscaster is like, live from around the world are 6 brave women who have collected the Earth's crystals needed to help keep the Earth's wobble in balance during the upcoming 4-day blackout. How does it feel, ladies, to be part of this historical Earth-saving mission? And she's... Dale's looking at this going, what have I done? How did they find out about my mission? How did they find the crystals? Oh, no. And then she doesn't understand how they could have, like, maybe the voice has hijacked her communication and read her mind about her mission, and these women are like fake Illuminati models who have stolen the crystals. She doesn't know what's going on. And she's just spazzing out over this TV show. And eventually Jacques comes back with Chinese takeaway. And the first thing he walks in, and the first thing he says, Dayle, why are the cops here? She doesn't realize that the whole time she's been watching this TV show, the room's been full of red and blue flashing lights because the police have been outside. And she's like, oh, I don't know. I had no idea. He goes outside to talk to the police. Remember the owner of their house and their guest house? His name's Paul, the friend of theirs. He's being arrested for voyeurism. He owns a bunch of properties and the police discovered that he had hidden cameras in his rental properties.
So was what she was doing, was that all caught on film?
Yeah, there's probably a tape of it somewhere.
That's awful.
Her naked and talking to the drain. But she then suddenly clicks in her head, that's how the Illuminati discovered my mission. It's because Paul is an Illuminati member.
Oh, and
his cameras were watching me.
I'm so concerned for her mental health. It's. Does she actually believe in, like, do you think from this story, does she believe that she's actually having these experiences, or does she understand that this is some type of, it's borderlining on what sounds to be, I mean, I'm no psychologist, but it almost sounds like she's having a psychotic episode.
So there's more, it's really like a shamanic journey after this. She gets transported to different places. After this, she basically thinks that there's hidden cameras everywhere, like typical paranoid delusion stuff. She's tearing the place apart, the apartment apart, to find these cameras. She eventually goes into a car with a knife and starts slicing open the seats to find the hidden listening devices that must be buried in there. But there's some incredible stories that follow this. Like, if you think this is weird, what I've just explained, it gets about 20 times weirder than this. I can't even explain to you the psychedelic bizarreness that she goes through, but I will kind of let you discover that. Again, I'll link to the book in the show notes, but I just want to, because the book's split into two parts. It's like this soul-changing, maddening adventure, and then the second part is her going, we're trying to put everything back together. And obviously she's written this book, so she's willing to lay bare what she's experienced. And she's now in that, like, that TV show is new. It's in season 4. She's a good actress on this new TV show. She's obviously not crazy anymore. So what's really interesting is finding out how she put her life back together after this serious psychotic break.
Yeah, well, was this kind of like an extended ego death as a result of the use of the ayahuasca?
Well, I'll get into that in a moment. And eventually more characters from history emerge. JC is in there, of course.
Of course, obligatory.
Abraham Lincoln makes an appearance at one stage, but not in a way you think. And JC appears in a really weird way as well. But eventually, I want to finish the story on the show from her mother's perspective, because while all this has been happening, you know how Jacques basically fed up with everything. He's been calling Dale's mother in Toronto saying, you've got to come and get your daughter. Like, he's been doing it for weeks, saying she's not eating, she's not sleeping, and she hasn't slept during all of this. She's just been awake for days, right? Weeks. And eventually gets to the point where he calls Dale's mother and says, you have to come now. She's lost it. She's going insane. So there's this scene where Jacques goes to pick up Dale's mother from the airport, and they get their mutual friend Rob to basically mind Dayle, because she's in the apartment kind of freaking out, and they're worried that she's going to hurt herself or hurt someone else.
Yeah.
Because she's been saying repeatedly since their landlord got arrested that she wants to murder him because he's in the Illuminati. The secret.
It sounds like a paranoid delusion.
So Rob goes over to their house to look after her, and as soon as Dayle sees him, she screams in terror. He tries to calm her down. She snatches his phone out of his hand, throws it against the wall, and smashes it into a million pieces. She runs outside naked and screaming at the top of her lungs. And this poor guy who's just trying to help out his friends has to get a towel and like try and wrap her up and bring her kicking and screaming. He flops her into the bathroom. She's basically flopping around like a fish out of water. And then her mother arrives. And when her mother goes in, she's naked in the bathroom, screaming, just screaming at the top of her lungs. She doesn't recognize her mother. And it's almost like her mother doesn't recognize her because her eyes have turned yellow because she hasn't been eating. Her lips are dry and cracked and bleeding. She'd lost 30 pounds in 40 days because she wasn't eating. She was basically skeletal at this stage, 90 pounds. And while all this is happening, while she's screaming, she's in another vision. And she's been sucked onto the stage during the Super Bowl halftime show. And this is 100% real to her. Fireworks are going off. The crowd is, 150,000 people cheering and screaming. And she's giving a performance. It actually feels like a million people, a billion people, she says. And they're all cheering for her. And she's inside this vision. But in the vision, she understands that she's undercover and she's performing an ancient goddess ritual, initiating every single human being in that stadium that's paying her attention.
Into what?
And as she dances, she feels goddess energy flowing within her. And I'll read you the rest of this. She says, I flashed my pussy at the audience. I bent over and opened my lips for them. The crowd was not shocked or appalled, nor was their attention perverse. Suddenly, as if she had some kind of magic vagina. She says, suddenly the entire stadium was taken deeper into the infinite zero space, and a pall fell over the crowd. The understanding that something sacred was happening clicked into gear. So she's doing this undulating, spreading her pussy lips dance to 1 billion people in her mind. She finishes the performance and the entire crowd goes wild. I mean, think of when Janet Jackson revealed her tit and there was a little star on it. It's like that times 1 billion.
Do crystals fall out?
It's like that, but everyone achieves enlightenment when they see it. And she's basking in the glory of raising the vibration of these millions of people at the Super Bowl.
I hate to think what her mother's seeing right now.
She gets off the stage and her friend who's a director approaches her, and he's now the new CEO of Disney. And he comes up to her and he goes, that performance was amazing. Disney wants to make a movie about your life because your story, it's a fairy tale. It's amazing. And she feels like all her dreams have come true. She's now going to be the star of this Disney film. She's living to her full potential. And this is where she says, no one could see this vision but me. Imagine this. My hair is standing on end. Deep black sunken circles surround my eyes. My eyes had turned yellow. I was anorexically thin and talking to myself, dancing around the room, showing off my pussy to my mother, Jacques, and my friend Rob. And
the shower's running. She's all wet. It's a mess.
And her mother just says, we need to take her to the hospital right now.
So she does get, what, 5150'd? She gets put into a hospital?
Look, I don't want to really spoil the story, but she does go to the hospital. There's another funny moment where they take her to the hospital and the hospital's like, look, we can't admit her unless she signs herself in because, you know, it's against the laws in the state. So they look at her and they think, well, maybe we can try and get her to sign herself in. They give her the paper. She just starts drawing like Norse runes on the paper and crescent moons. So what they have to do, the woman at the, you know, institution basically says, look, there's kind of a loophole. If she gets brought here in an ambulance, we have to take her.
Yeah, right.
So
they involuntary.
They drive all the way back home, call an ambulance for her, and the ambulance arrives. She gets strapped to the gurney, and one of the EMT guys is black. And she just starts calling him the N-word nonstop.
Oh my
it's so
God,
bad.
that's
and
terrible.
Then her husband Jacques goes, oh, I'm sorry. She's confused because her father's black. She's like, her father's black. She's really confused. She doesn't mean it at you.
Well, she's clearly psychotic.
And meanwhile, Dayle says, no, I'm not talking to him. I'm talking to you, Jacques. You're the N-word, you N-word. And she just keeps yelling it at him. It's just a fantastic story. I highly recommend it. And when she starts to put the pieces back together, essentially what you start to see is that from our point of view, this is someone who's lost their mind.
Yeah, having a psychotic break.
They're having a psychotic break.
Yeah.
She's seeing things that are insane. But she ends up speaking with a Jungian psychologist who is also familiar with shamanic initiations. And what we learn in the second half of the book, not giving too much away, but basically...
Is this a modern shamanic initiation?
What she goes through is the very pattern, the very archetype of being initiated into being a shaman.
Okay.
Everything down to, the story of being a hero in your own, world of your own demons and your own tribulations. It's like being put through the ringer to experience a transformation. And in a traditional society, perhaps she would have come out as a medicine woman or a shaman.
Well, was it the Tibetan crazy men? Do you remember how there's some, shamanic, or like, I guess it's like an initiation of some kind where you basically have the crazy men and they're completely insane, but they're revered by their culture as being holy men or as being, some type of witch doctor.
But it really kind of underlines the importance of having the right structure when you're doing something like ayahuasca.
Absolutely,
because, the tribe where that's come from, the shaman's not just going to send you back off to your home in California and then be done with you.
There's no quick fix with this thing.
You're always there with the tribe. If you start to go through an initiatory experience, you have a guide there who knows what's happening, who can take you through it. And we just obviously don't have that in society. And the result is you end up flashing your pussy at a bunch of people, including your mother. So there's so much more in there. I barely covered half of her shamanic journey. Eventually she's going into the ocean and doing crazy stuff. There's mermaids. There's all sorts of, there's great white sharks. It gets wild even more. There's robots. It gets even more wild than that. I highly recommend you check it out. It's The Big Dream, my terrifyingly beautiful shamanic initiation into the arts. And again, the second half is all about her putting the pieces back together and being normal again, transforming into something new. From Dayle McLeod. I'll link to it in the show notes. You can also find it at her website at thebigdreambook.com. But that's not all we have on this episode. Coming up after the break in our Plus extension, we're going to dive back into the Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life. I can't wait to hear this because one of my regrets from doing that segment on the last Plus episode is I only got so far in. I didn't get to hear the whole story.
Well, full disclosure, I was thinking that this was going to be completely out there, extremely controversial. Almost it's going to trigger some people. It's going to upset some people. But after that story, I think we'll find it's going to be rather mundane.
Fair enough.
So maybe we'll consider it a palate cleanse. So go to the Plus extension. It'll be nice and clean.
Is Kanye in the Plus extension at all?
There's no madness. It's actually terrifying in some aspects, but also enlightening in others.
Oh.
So we're going to go into essentially how electromagnetic frequencies, which, as I said at the start of the show, I didn't believe in any of that stuff. I thought it's absolute garbage, but there is solid scientific backed evidence that suggests that human beings and animals and plants are affected by electromagnetic frequencies in very negative ways. And we're completely saturated in it, completely saturated in it. And the only way we can get away from it is essentially shutting down some essential services that our modern society is now completely reliant upon. So the future is very intriguing with some of this research. So we're going to go into that. We're going to go into the stories about how this has been found with research going all the way back to the early 1800s.
And from the intro, we had the electromagnetic disease weapons.
Yes, that is explained. So as I said, people like Dr. Stephen Greer, who I thought were a bit loopy and have made outrageous claims that he's been shot with a cancer gun. I really thought that kind of stuff was garbage, but maybe there is something to it and it relates to electromagnetic frequencies.
Well, we've discussed the cancer gun on previous shows when Russell Targ even spoke about it.
No, that was the heart attack gun.
Oh, the heart attack gun.
Yes. And so also that heart attack gun may be disinformation for a different type of weapon that can still induce heart attacks.
Oh, wow.
But it's not the way that's been described by the CIA.
Okay, more coming up on our Plus extension. Sign up for Plus to get access to that. Head to mysteriousuniverse.org/Plus. All the details are there. You know the drill. Extra shows, extra stuff, higher bitrate feed. You get an extra long show on Friday. You get a whole exclusive show on Tuesday. Yeah, it'd be crazy to sign up.
It's all there.
It'd be crazy not to sign up.
You're locked in your house. You got nowhere to go. You're sick of Netflix. Sign up for Plus. Give it a try.
Yeah. mysteriousuniverse.org/Plus has all the details. $9 a month. Help support your favorite show. That's a wrap for this free edition of IVMU. Thanks for listening. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week. Steel Plus Extension, great to have you with us.